Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is all about social psychology. If you'd like to know more about social psychology, then you take the full course, which is Psych 235. So for social psychology, we're going to go into why we behave the way we do based off of our social circumstances and just how much that really does decide our behaviors. We're going to get into some questions right off the bat in the beginning, and we're going to learn whether you make good choices or not. So get out a sheet of paper, get out a pen or a pencil so that you can answer those questions because they're going to be quick and to the point. First question is not one that you have to write down, by the way. Do you judge other people instantly? And it's yes or no. And of course, the answer is yes. Now, we'd like to think that we have evolved over time and say, no, I don't judge people instantly. I want to know their personality. I want to get to know them. But that's not actually what we do. Our minds go and categorize people in many different fashions right off the bat. And so you do it instantaneously. You do it within 7 seconds and less than 7 seconds. And you decide whether they're essentially a good person or a bad person. And based off of those categories, if you've already decided they're a bad person, it will take a great deal for you to change into, oh, well, maybe they're a good person instead. And it goes the opposite way as well. Once you've made that decision, it's hard to contradict that decision and go the opposite way. Now, we've looked at this before, and this is the old woman, and this is the young woman, a different version of that picture. You should be able to see both since we've practiced that before if you were able to see both then. And you can look back and forth. Again, what this social psychology has to do with is what have you been primed with? What is your background knowledge? What have you been told? What have you learned over time? A lot of it can be, in fact, a great deal of it is information that you don't even recognize as somebody stating this is what you believe or stating this is how you should behave. It is more the information that you have taken in over time that leads you to believe a certain way without a direct correlation many times. So the first thing that we have is that person perception, that making that judgment call or drawing a conclusion right off the bat on somebody. Now remember, this is an ever-changing process. So the way you perceive somebody one day, if you had met them another day, you would have perceived them differently. It can be based off your mood. It can be based off of a lot of things. And there are four main categories of why we perceive somebody in a certain manner that we'll go over. Now, snap judgments that you make on somebody is typically based off their looks. In fact, it is based off their looks and what you deem as safe or not safe, good or bad, evil or, altruistic. We tend to be correct 60% of the time. But that means we also fail at this around 40% of the time. Now, that's on average. Now, remember, everything we go over in psychology is the way most of the people react to something. So we're going to check out how you react to things and whether you fall in the average of 60% or if you're better than average or if you're worse than average. So here's our little game that we're going to play right off the bat. It's called the 7-second decision. Now, you must make a decision. So I want you to write down, I think I have 7 questions here. But what you're going to do is write down on a sheet of paper 1 through 7, and then it's going to be quick. It's going to be 7 seconds or less for each one. You're going to get 2 pictures of people, and you have to choose who you're going to sit next to. Now, let's pretend you're either on a subway or around us. It's more likely to be a bus. But you get on that bus, and you must choose a seat. You're not allowed to stand up. You are not allowed to get off the bus. And there's a couple times you'll want to get off the bus, but you can't. You must choose a seat. So are you going to choose seat A or number 1 or seat B or number 2? Which one are you going to sit next to? Now your choices are going to pertain to either somebody who will kill you and you will die or somebody who is safe. Okay? So get your paper, get your pencil, get everything ready so that you're ready to rock and roll, because this is going to be quick. Snap decisions is what it's called. So as I start sliding through this, it's going to move fast. And then when we're done, I'll explain to you why we make those decisions and then where you are on that choice category. All right, so here we go. Would you choose person 1 or person 2? 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 That's it. Okay, so hopefully you got them all down. I don't want you going back and waiting for a half an hour on each one to try and figure it out, but each one is going to be quick. It's got to be a snap decision, all right? So if you missed one, you can go back, but make sure it's quick. So here we go. What are the reasons why? And you need to know these 4 reasons. The first one is your reactions to other people and your perception of them. Do you deem them as somebody who might be threatening or not? Such as Santa there with that little one. Some kids are just all into it, and other kids are like, oh no, this guy looks like he's a scary beast to me. So what is the main reason we have a perception of other people? Well, one of them is called the halo effect. The halo effect is the fact that our brain looks at other people and categorizes them as beautiful or not. If they're beautiful, they automatically get linked into good people, just the way our brain works. Now, part of that is our background knowledge. Just look at Disney and the way evil people are ugly and good people are beautiful. That kind of thing has been told to us forever. Stranger danger, and the image that you get of a stranger for stranger danger, I bet you is not a beautiful person coming up to you to try and interact with you. So this halo effect is a big thing where if they were good looking, you're going to think that they are a good person and that's the best place for you to be. Instead of understanding, by the way, that most serial killers are very good looking individuals. It's about the symmetry of the face. Asymmetry means it's not even. Symmetry means it's even. And as soon as you look at a symmetrical face that seems more even, you're going to look at them as a more beautiful person and have more positive thought processes right off the bat to go along with them. The second one is your self-perception, what you think about yourself. Now, you can't see me right now, but I'm 4'9". I'm short. So I got this picture here, and symbolically, the little one is me. So I will go into a theater or someplace, and I will notice that when other people come in, maybe after us, if there's a tall person that has the seat in front of me, they will switch with somebody else. Their self-perception right off the bat is they are too tall for me to see around them or over them or anything like that. So they will alter their position because of their self-perception. Now, for my self-perception, it's not the seating arrangement necessarily based on height. People can see over me. It's just that easy. They got no problem with that whatsoever. But my personality can be exuberant, to say the least. So peppy is a minimalistic kind of thing for my personality. It is out there. It is, exuberance, just the perfect word, I guess. So, when I go places and I'm going with my friends, there can be times, especially if you add alcohol to this personality. So an already exuberant personality, add alcohol to it and bam, it's just outrageous. So we'll get to places and I will see people absolutely start to cower in their seat. The automatic, they haven't heard me, they haven't, they could just see my exuberance just powerfully emanating out of my body. And so they will almost go into a fetal position like, oh, jeez, I don't want her sitting next to me. That's just too much. And so a friend of mine, my shovel pal, she will actually go, all right, I need to go in there first because we can actually see this behavior from them and see that my personality is too much to sit next to them. Works great in the classroom, doesn't work great for people, for certain people that just are super shy or don't want to interact. Now, is my personality like that all the time? No, it's not. Typically work with hundreds and hundreds of people a day. I interact with a lot of people. I always am on. It's like a show for me. So when I get home, I'm done. I'm done with people. I'm done with interacting a lot of time, unless I've planned for an event. When I get home, I don't want to see other people. I don't want to interact with other people. So there's times, can we go to a restaurant or something like that and I don't have this problem? Absolutely. But you can really see the difference emanating from me without even looking at what I've said or looking at who I actually am or anything like that. All right, number three, what are your goals? So it's your goals in that situation. Now, I had to put this down here because, of course, I've got a story to go along with it. So we have the gal there that you could just tell she's not really wanting to chat with people. She just wants to be left alone. And then there's those that chat. And I got the little old gal there that has her, family photo album. Now, why do I have a story about this? I was going to speak at a conference in Arizona, and so long flight. So I got out my laptop and I actually asked for help with this. I said, the other thing about me is that there's almost like this big neon sign on my forehead that says, talk to me. Talk to me and touch me. People touch me all the time. I could do without that, trust me. And there's times I could do without the talk to me. So even when I'm not in that mood that I have, that exuberance isn't there, there is something about me that people will look at and say, oh, I could talk to her. Perfect strangers. It doesn't matter if I'm grocery shopping and people want to tell me about their hemorrhoids or how their kids behave or what it is. It's just they want to talk to me. Okay? So I got on this flight and I had practiced with my significant other. Now, my significant other is somebody nobody talks to at all. He is the complete opposite on that for me. So when we're out, people will literally walk way around him, give him a wide circle, and then they'll come to me to talk, even though they were right next to him. So I said to him, all right, now how do you do this? How is it that you can make people not talk to you? I want to get on this flight. I want to be quiet. I want just to get my work done and people to leave me alone. And I've never been able to be on a flight and have that happen. So he taught me, wear dark colors like black. So I bought myself a black hoodie. Bring it down so that they can't see your face because you're always smiling at people, even when you're in a bad mood. You always make eye contact with people. Don't do that. He was giving me these clues because he snickers all the time at the differences between us. And then put your headphones in. Play your loud, heavy metal music just the way you normally do. And then, sort of crouch that laptop right up next to you. So I did. I tried to look like that woman on the top as much as possible. And then all of a sudden I noticed as people were getting on the plane that there was this really chatterbox older gal that had come on, a grandmotherly type, probably in her 80s. And her husband was right behind her, and they were chatting all the way there. And she caught my eye right off the bat and went, oh, I think we're sitting next to her. And by golly, they were. So they came in, and the guy came to sit first because he was going next to the window, and I had the aisle seat. And he just looked at me and mouthed, I'm sorry, and then sat down and stared out the window. She, on the other hand, as she was sitting down, lifted my chin up with her finger and started chatting to me. Noticed I had the headphones in, pulled those out on her own, and then took her fingers to open up that hoodie more so that she could see my full face. And then she literally took the laptop, closed the laptop, got out these photo albums. She had 4 of them, and she put them on top of my laptop, and she wanted to tell me about her life. Now, I was trying to be, I tried to muster up a cranky attitude. I think they call it resting, what face and that kind of thing. And I couldn't do it because right off the bat she said, "Oh, I'm just coming from my last chemotherapy. This is the 4th time I've been through cancer, and they've given me no more than 6 months to a year." Well, of course, who's going to turn that woman down on wanting to chat with you about her life? So the whole flight, and it was a long, long flight, including a layover, by the way, and she chatted the whole time. We went through every photo album. Now, mind you, that when we landed, she wasn't done. So everybody else got off the plane, and we were still sitting there going through her photo album to the point that the stewardesses came and wanted to, eject us. But of course, she told them the same story. So they stood behind the seats and looked at the photo albums as well. The pilot came, and I could tell what he wanted to do. Well, that ended as well, and he stood there and watched the rest of the photo albums, and it was enough to make that plane late for leaving for its next flight. She wanted my email address. She wanted to write to me. She did. She didn't email. She wrote to me. And I wrote back. And then all of a sudden, they started coming. So I had to make the assumption that her life had ended. And then, of course, I felt like, well, that was a wonderful thing that actually happened. Everything was meant to be, blah, blah, blah. But the thing was, my goals were completely different than what actually had happened. The other thing is how we expect them to act. Now, we are based off of, if you look at that picture, you look at that person and go, oh, some days I know I'd be like, oh yeah, let's do this. And other days I'm like, oh no, that's too much for me. I'm sitting way away from that person. So there's these unwritten rules, these unwritten social norms of the way we expect others to act. And if they go outside those norms or could potentially go outside those norms. So those are the 4 main reasons why we make the choices that we make. So now we're going to look at what choices you have made. So get out that sheet of paper and what answers you chose on person 1 or person 2. So on the first picture, choosing person 1, you're dead. So right off to the side that you died, that, point an arrow down, something like that. Give it some kind of symbol that says, this was the bad choice. So if you chose Carla, bad choice. Okay? Now, I'll have men that say, well, she was a murderer and rapist, and that doesn't pertain to me. But they have found that she always had a man around to assist her with these, and these men are missing and haven't been found. So don't think that you're safe that way. You're dead too. Now, if you chose person number 2, the one who looks more like she's not a happy camper, that resting face, she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. It's the symmetry of their faces that tend to make that choice. Now, in picture 2, we have person 1. If you chose person 1, you're safe. Person 1 is Mick Jagger. Hopefully you didn't recognize that right off the bat because that nullifies that decision. But he's the lead singer for Rolling Stones. You might get a contact high or something like that sitting next to him. But other than that, you should be pretty safe. Person 2, even though on my PowerPoint it says person 1, 2. I screwed up on the numbers, but he's person 2, and that's Richard Ramirez, and he's the Night Stalker. You're dead. Okay? Let's go to 3. So picture 3, we have Rodney, and Rodney is in both picture 1 and picture 2. But here's what we know about young compared to old. If you picked number 1, Rodney, then you're dead. If you picked number 2, Rodney, then you're safe. Now, people will say, well, he was still in jail or anything like that for number 2. That's not the reason. This was the dating game killer. And he really was on an old television show called The Dating Game, where they'd have a person, and then behind a wall, they'd have 3 choices. And they could ask them questions, and based off their questions, they would choose who they wanted. Know that our serial killers tend to be intelligent people that can manipulate you into believing just about anything. So So he was called the dating game killer because during his killing spree, in it, not at the beginning, not at the end, but mid, he was on this dating game and then was chosen and did go out with this gal. Supposedly, she said he gave her the heebie-jeebies and she had him take her home early. And of course, she was safe. Now, why was she safe? She was safe, first of all, because he's intelligent enough not to kill the person that he's been on television with. That's going to bring some unwanted people around asking questions. So, of course, he didn't kill her. They did say, though, that some people that he did kill, either that night or within the next day, looked just like her. So, Rodney 2, why is he safer than Rodney 1? He's older. Now, you have to just look at older individuals in the first place. When they get in and out of a chair, they make funky noises. They go, ooh, when they're getting in and out of a chair. Well, why is it they do that? Because their muscle tone's not at their peak. Their body's not working at its peak. Many of our serial killers, they don't do that by gun. They want a hands-on experience. They want to feel it. So they can't do it as they're older. The other thing that we found with their brains is that it seems to calm down after a certain age. They can look back at that past, look at the things that they have acquired over time through that serial killing, and that brings them contentment through memories instead of having to do it. So Rodney 1, bad. Rodney 2, good. Next one we have, picture number 4, is Jeffrey Dahmer. So if you chose picture number 1, you're dead, of course. Now, picture number 2 is Mark Harmon. He's the person who played Jeffrey Dahmer in a movie. Now, of course, Mark Harmon is also on NCIS now, if you ever watched that. So person 1 on this one, dead. Person 2, safe. Next picture we have, if you chose Tommy, the first picture, you're dead. If you chose Marty, the second picture, you're safe. And then we go down to the next one. This one you may have wanted to get off the bus on this. So when we look at the first picture compared to the second picture, they worked in cahoots together. They were called the GPS killers. Now, when people work in cahoots, we also tend to know that there's a dominant personality and a submissive personality. It's almost like a domestic violence relationship. So the dominant personality is the one who chooses who dies. Not only that, if you interact with the dominant personality, if they notice you, then you get higher on that list of being chosen. The submissive personality, on the other hand, they not only don't choose who is doing it, but the dominant personality tends to either look at them negatively, ignore them completely, think that they are just worthless. So anyone around them is deemed as unimportant as well. So if you chose picture 1, the dude in the white shirt, then that's the dominant in this couple, and that's the one who chooses whether you die or not, so you're dead, number 1. Number 2 is the submissive, so you're safe with him. And then our last picture, if you chose person number 1 with that wonderful hairstyle, then you're safe, actually. And person number 2 is Ted Bundy, of course, you're dead. So when you look back at these 7 choices that you made, what I want you to do is count up how many times you're dead, count up how many times you're alive, and then do your math there. Are you at around 60% of the time being safe, or were you worse than that? So if you're worse than that, you might need some assistance in making choices when people are around. It can be for a few different reasons. It can be that you just don't see it, but it can also be that you can see the pain in their eyes. That means that you recognize with people when things have gone bad in their past, and they may never talk about it, but you can see it there. And the unfortunate thing is that you can see the pain, but you don't see the negative aspect that can go along with that pain. You have to be very careful about relationships that you get into, because you'll see that pain and you'll use that excuse for that pain for bad behavior. So be very careful. If you're somebody who picked safe more often than that 60%, then there's something that you can see that others can't see most often to keep you on a safe basis. Okay? All right, so looking at social psychology and the whole deal that goes along with it is about that personality psychologist compared to social psychologist. Now, we just went over the chapter about personality psychologists that look at the person's disposition. What is their personality that makes them behave the way they do? Social psychologists, and what this whole chapter is about, is the situation. What is the situation that influences us to make the decisions that we do? So it all has to do with attribution. When we look at attribution, it is the conclusion that we drew right off the bat, that instantaneous thing that we did, that says, based off of those four reasons, things that we think about them, things that we think about ourselves, all of that stuff comes into play, which leads us to the attribution theory. So when it comes to the attribution theory, there are two main parts to it, situational and dispositional. Of course, social psychology is all about situational. What is the situation that caused that behavior? Dispositional is all about that personality that they have. Now, in Western culture, we tend to go, remember, with dispositional. It's all about their personality. Collectivistic cultures go into situational attribution, which means that it's about the situation that caused the event. So those of us in Western culture tend to have a problem called the fundamental attribution error, which means we make mistakes in going too far in believing it's about their personality than it is about the situation. So an example of that, I already spoke in the last chapter about somebody coming into a classroom, tripping over a rug, and what we think about that. And that's just this example right off the bat to make that fundamental attribution error. So here's another fundamental attribution error. We have road rage. Now, why is it? Somebody cuts you off in traffic. You call them a jerk. Oh, I'm quite sure that you flew them the bird. There's all sorts of things that you think about that person right off the bat. Instead of thinking, what is the situation that caused them to pull out in front of you in traffic? Was it that they just didn't see you? Was it that they, like you, when you've pulled out in traffic, were late for work or needed to get there really quick, or thought that you sped up fast enough that it didn't interrupt them and make them brake? Or what was the situation? And they have that somebody's laying in the back of that car in labor and they need to get to the hospital as soon as possible. Okay? Another fundamental attribution error, we go into the grocery store and you know that aisle that says it's 12 items or less. Many times there's nobody in that aisle, but by God, when you get in that aisle and somebody's in front of you, I bet you automatically start to count to see how many items they have. And did they obey the rules of 12 items or less? And if they didn't, we automatically think negatively about that person, that they too are a jerk, that there's something wrong with them, or that they can't count, or there's all sorts of things we'll come up with. We don't tend to think right off the bat, and I've had this happen to me as well, that that person didn't have, that cashier didn't have anybody in their line for a long period of time, walked over and said, hey, come on over here and come to my line. Now, I know I've told her, go, I know what people do when they come up behind you. And I've had a cashier say, you know, I haven't had anybody in my line for a couple hours. If I don't get somebody, then they're going to put me doing, I don't remember what she said, but something else that she didn't want to do. So please come over here and let me check you out. Well, as soon as I got over there and had everything on the line and she started running it through, somebody came up behind me and you could just see the look on their face. They did not look at me as a good person. I tried to explain to them. They didn't care. So it was just a negative situation. Again, it was a situation. It wasn't the personality that made that decision. And then we have this, and whether you like the title or not, it is well known in college circles as the bitch study. So at Williams College, they did this, and what they find is between men and women, men can behave where they can ignore you, they can walk away from you, they can go do other things, and it's not a big deal, and they can behave certain ways, and they just think, oh, well, it's a man, you know, the boys will be boys thing. But women have been raised a different way. Women have been raised that they have to be nice all the time. And so if they're not nice, they have to prove why they're not nice. And so essentially, this is what this study was doing. And so they had women and men in graduate programs. Now, if you're in a graduate program, you're getting your credit based off of the research that you're participating in. And so if you don't do as told exactly, which could, ruin the research itself, then you will automatically flunk. You're not going anywhere. So what they did with these individuals is say, all right, we're going to divide classes up. And in these classes, let's say we're going to have a pizza party or something like that. And here's pictures of people that you can talk to, you can interact with, and here's people that you cannot. You can't even smile at them. You can't wink at them. You can't interact with them at all. You need to look away and walk away. And so they had this study going, and women would come in, ignore the people they're supposed to ignore, interact with the other people, and as soon as she walked out, have everybody sit down and write down what they thought about her. Well, you can tell based off of the title of the study that we call it, the number one word that came up. And it didn't matter how long ago it was, even recent studies go the same way. It's exactly the same. Then we tell them the situation. We explain to them the situation and then have them tell us, what do you think her personality is like? And they come up with the same word. They describe her the same way. Now, why do they describe her the same way? They describe her the same way because that first impression, that initial impression, is extremely hard to change even when you give them the situation that caused that behavior. All right, social thinking, us versus others. When we look at that, same thing that we had before, we tend to, in individualistic cultures, Western culture, otherwise known as us, blame situations for our failures, but we take credit for our successes instead of giving it to others. Which leads us to that same three things that we had in the last chapter. For collectivistic cultures, it's about the situation. Credit is given to others, blame for failures taken on oneself. So completely different basis, completely different thought process, completely different attributions. So we are the ones with the fundamental attribution error that happens so often. Now, are there political effects of attribution? Absolutely. And boy, can we see those in today's age. So let's say you see a hobo on the street, dirty clothes, filthy, smells, all of that, and they're asking for money. Okay? Now, many people will look at them like, get a job, I got a job. They'll think right off the bat that there's something wrong with that individual, personality rise, instead of looking at a situation that have caused them to be where they're at and asking money. Now, what if we add in that they were drinking? Maybe they're drunk. Maybe you could tell that they're high as a kite, they're a meth addict, or anything like that. Do those change your assumptions as well? Typically, it makes them worse. Now, here's what we know about homeless. More than a third, last numbers were about 37.8% of the homeless population are those military personnel that we're not taking care of through our military, have post-traumatic stress disorder, and are on the streets. They do it for the safety of their loved ones. They do it because of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And the one thing that we know is that they'll drink alcohol. Alcohol tends to be a self-medicating substance for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the other thing is drugs do as well. We know that about 30% of the population that is also on the streets have schizophrenia. Now, what situation caused that? The schizophrenia is genetic, but when we look at the situation as to why they're out on the streets, we did a thing called deinstitutionalization in the 1970s that said we didn't like giving our taxes to other people, and we didn't like giving our taxes to those people that needed help and could not obtain or keep a job on their own, and that included schizophrenics. So even though that they were hospitalized, we literally gave them a 10-day supply of medication. Many of them were left right in their gowns because they didn't have clothes, opened up the doors and said, here you go, you're on your own, figure it out. Now, schizophrenia is not a type of mental disorder where you can make an appointment to get more medication or even get to your appointment to get your medication or anything like that. So there was nothing that, by the way, it's also one that doesn't help you to remember to take medication even though you have it. So they're the ones that are also homeless and on the street. Now what we find is most schizophrenics use meth or something along that line. And we also find, studies are finding that meth works better with schizophrenia and the symptoms of schizophrenia than almost all the medications that we can give you. Now, that's unfortunate. The side effects of meth, although death is one of them, death is also one of them for the medications we give for schizophrenia. Then in addition to that, meth has more positive side effects than any of our medications that we can give you. And medications for schizophrenia are considered the worst of the worst. They're the ones that have the highest ramifications that go along with it. So now they are beginning a great deal of studies on why meth works, what can they do to try and make medications actually more like meth without the side effects of meth. But know that just because they're an addict or a druggie, it doesn't necessarily mean that that was their personality. So now I know I have some of you right now going, well, what about the real drug addicts? They chose that. When we went through addiction, did they truly choose it? Or did they have a predisposition toward addiction? Did they have the genetic predisposition toward addiction? Was it that that first drink all of a sudden made them an addict compared to somebody else who can drink whenever they want and it never tends to cause a problem? Was it really a choice? And then we also have to look at the solutions that we have. That's our politics, and that's where we get into it. When we automatically think of one instance and say, all right, that's the reason why these people are homeless. I know of somebody that just didn't want to get a job and just didn't want to be a responsible person. You don't think there was a mental illness in there in the first place to think that way, to be that way, massive depression, massive anxiety, anything along that line that could have caused that. So we have to look at the situations that cause people's behavior. When we look at welfare, welfare is something that people just have a tither about. But had we corrected and fixed the problems, they wouldn't be on welfare. Had we trained them the way we should, they wouldn't be on welfare. Instead of defunding all the programs because we don't like the fact that we're paying our taxes to help other people who need it, had we taken care of them, then they wouldn't be on welfare now. And there's many different situations that go along with that. So I know, of course, people will say, well, I know that one person that is just using the system. All right, try to find the situation as to why they're using the system. What really is there? And is there a way to fix it? And we have found, and in countries that do have the system in place to correct it, they hardly have any problems whatsoever with the problems that we have and that we hate so much. Now we're going to go into attitude and our actions that go along with attitudes. Now, we're not talking about that teenage attitude where you cock your head to the side and you got, you're just full of pee and vinegar and you're nasty to people. We're talking about attitudes that sustain throughout a lifespan. And they are your feelings, ideas, and beliefs that affect how you approach and react to others. And that means others, people, objects, and events. So what is our attitude and what was impacting our attitude to react a certain way? So let's take a look at a few things. Have you ever persuaded someone to do something they didn't really want to do or wish they'd never done? Have you ever persuaded somebody to go out that didn't really want to go out? Have you ever persuaded your parents to let you go someplace that they didn't really want to let you go? Have you ever persuaded anybody to do anything? A lot of times in relationships we'll call this cooperation, but it's persuasion, quite simply. So we have to look at the two different types of persuasion that we have. We have the central route of persuasion and the peripheral route of persuasion. So the central route of persuasion is where we use facts, data, scientific knowledge, and logic to get you to make a decision a certain way. That is the best way for it to happen. It is the one that is least likely to occur. So why is it that we have attitude changes and personality changes in college? Because we're going through the central route of persuasion. Scientific research, facts, data, logic, and evidence that goes along with it. Unfortunately, people, because our brain works the simplest way it can, it goes the peripheral route of persuasion. And that has nothing to do with actual logic or data. It has to do with opinions. It has to do with your own fears, your own desires, and things that you make associations with that are just automatically there. When you look at commercials, you can see this. Anytime you see a commercial where somebody's in a white lab jacket and they have a stethoscope around their neck, you automatically think that what they're telling you is based off of science, data, and facts, and it's trying to look at the central route of persuasion. But is it really? Or is that the peripheral route where you have that automatic association? So you really need to look at, is it logic-based? Is it evidence-based? Or is it based off of fears, desires, and associations? Now, here's one that is quite famous, whether you're on one side or the other. Universal health care is the first step towards socialism. Now, here's how they got you to believe that. For socialism, it is a hated term in the United States. They don't want to be a socialist republic. They don't want socialism. They don't want our tax dollars going to help other people. But socialism means you can't vote. It's not a votable thing. Do we really think that in the United States we're going to allow uh, to just be taken over and no more voting? It just doesn't work that way. So they associated universal health care with socialism so that because you'd associate socialism with all that hatred, all that no, I don't want to do it, you would automatically link universal health care there as well. So it was an awesome ad production. It was an awesome way to go about getting people to hate universal health care because there was automatically that hatred towards socialism in the thought process that goes with socialism. Link those two, bam, then you get everybody thinking a certain way, just the way you want them to. Whenever you hear about sheep following, this is what they're talking about, that you automatically link those two. Where's the research that proves this? Where's the logic that proves this? All of that tends to be based off of opinion and not logic, not the central route of persuasion. It's the peripheral route of persuasion. And even though we know better, we can actually still do the wrong thing. So on the other PowerPoint, or this one if it allows you to, I want you to click on that link. Now that link there is about somebody, we've been taught forever that if you see smoke billowing in, get out. For your own safety, smoke tends to be linked with fire. But will we change our minds when our society around us is saying essentially by the behavior that that's not the thing to do? Everything's fine. This is the way it is. We become those sheep. So what you're going to see, and I want you to watch the time clock on it, is an individual when they are by themselves. This has been done over and over with, thousands of people. But when they're by themselves, they make the choice, they get out of the room. When they're with others that are all in on the gig, we call them Confederates, and they're all just sitting there doing that paperwork. It's for a job interview, actually, and they have to sit there. They've been told that they have to stay there and fill that out. If they leave the room, then they won't be able to get that interview. And watch how long they'll stay there because they look around and they see nobody else moving. So they will actually go against that inner belief system that they have and then stay there. Now we're going to go over this again a little later in this chapter. And it's called cognitive dissonance. You can see the distress on her face, but what we'll do is justify. And that's what you do is change your mind. Based off your behavior. So she'll sit there 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And what is it that she's doing that makes her stay there? It's cognitive dissonance. She knows she needs to leave, but she doesn't do that. Her behavior makes her stay there based off of that peer pressure. So what she's doing in her mind and what she told us afterwards is that, no one else was doing it, so it must have been safe. That's cognitive dissonance. You changed your mind to fit your behavior, even though the original thought process was, I should get out of here. That's the same thing with universal health care and that step towards socialism. So, you think, nope, that's not the way it is, but other people around you believe it is, have an impact on it. You vote that way. And so, therefore, you voted. That makes your behavior. That's a behavior. So now you'll justify it by saying, I know that friend, or I've seen this happen, or that's whatever excuse you use will be that justification for that cognitive dissonance based off of your behavior. So, behavior changing that mind into a different mindset. All right, now what are the different ways that we persuade people? So first we got the definition on the bottom of persuasion and a few different ways that we persuade people. So this is the first one, and the first one is she goes in and she's asking her mom, she actually wants a fish. She wants just a little bowl with a little something in there, but a fish. So in order to get the fish, she goes big first. She says, I want a dog. Okay? Now, when she goes in to ask for the dog, the parents are like, oh no, give all the reasons why she wants the dog, all the reasons why she shouldn't have the dog. So they do this cooperation thing, which means they start to come to a compromise. And instead, she gets more than what she wants. She gets a fish tank and all this stuff to go in it with her fish because she asked for something bigger. You know, you do this when you go in for negotiations on pay wages. You ask for more than what you want. Don't figure out what you want. Ask for more than what you want because you know they're always going to come down from there. Now, a couple other things that we have are the foot in the door, role playing cognitive dissonance, that term that we just came up with. So let's look at the foot in the let's look at the foot in the door first. So we have it with a political campaigner that comes to your door. Why is it that they always have a pamphlet to hand you? They have a pamphlet to hand you because at first you open the door to talk to them, and maybe you've got a screen door in the way, and they want to hand you this pamphlet. Just take this. So as soon as you open the screen door, they'll actually move their foot to keep that screen door open. Because now the more they talk to you, the more they can convince you to go their way, to continue in their thought process. So just handing you that thing, just getting you to open that door to hand it to you, you're going to find the conversation lasts longer. You're going to find that the door gets opened more and more and more, and they come closer and closer so that they can get through the door and into your entryway. That is called the small compliance to a large compliance, because that foot in the door, as soon as they get you on a small level, they can bring in things from a bigger level. That's what this is all about. Now, role playing. The whole thing is fake it till you make it, just like Alcoholics Anonymous slogan. They fake that they are not an alcoholic one day, and then they fake it another day, and they fake it another day until they become not drinking each and every day. So you role play what you want to be. Now, the effects of role playing, though, are pretty stupendous, just like they are with alcoholics. That's why they do it. In marriages that are assigned, they fake that they're in love, and they find that they actually do find that they are deeply in love with that person after time. Actors lose themselves in their roles, and they tend to have hard times coming out of them. So, yes, you can fake it until you make it. Now, one of the most famous studies on faking it till you make it would have been the Stanford Prison Study. So the Stanford Prison Study had people from Stanford University. They checked them all to make sure that they did studies and tests on them to make sure they were all psychologically good to go. And then they assigned them randomly who was a prisoner and who was a guard. And then they gave them outfits. They gave prisoners prisoner type outfits. They gave guards guard type outfits. I want you to just think of the term alone. How would you behave as a guard compared to how you think you should behave as a prisoner? Those titles, that role playing, automatically leads you to behave a certain way. Now, when you watch this link, it's going to explain it, and it's also going to show how some people get lost in their role and they go to an extreme even though they were deemed as psychologically healthy beforehand. And then prisoners do the same thing. So what tends to happen is some cognitive issues that come along on both sides. And it remains even afterwards. So there'll be a discussion afterwards between a guard and a prisoner. I want you to look at the guard, even though it's months later. He no longer has that title. When he's in that situation, is he in that guard dominant position? Is he in that guard dominant stance? And you will find that he still is. Is the prisoner is still in that submissive prisoner type stance? And you'll find that those roles take effect and take over who you are. So make sure you watch that before we go on. And then we have cognitive dissonance. We've already discussed cognitive dissonance, and here's an example of that. The Festinger study was they gave really, really boring tasks to students, and then afterwards the students really didn't like them. And then what they told them to do is, we need more people to do this, so can you tell others that you enjoyed the task, that it was worthwhile, that you learned a lot from it. And if they were paid $20, they'd be like, oh, yeah, I was paid $20 to lie. I'm good with that. But what if they were paid less? What if they were only paid $1 or not paid at all? Would they lie just for doing it? And what they found was that some people do lie because you ask them to. And what they tend to do with their brain is afterwards they'll say, well, really, it really wasn't that bad. I didn't really hate it. I must have learned something. They'll give or assign some kind of good to it because they were telling other people that it was good. Now, the opposite way, if we have studies that there's something they really enjoyed and we had them telling other people that they hated it, afterwards we would find that months later they'd tell us that it was a horrible event, even though they told us right at the beginning that it was wonderful. So up at the top, I have a link there, and it's not a link of a video. It's a link to paper, and it will show us our thought processes. So go to that, read through that if you will, please, and then we can move on. Now, when we look at cultural influences, what is it that makes us do these things? First of all, it's our culture. Our culture is shared. It's passed down generation after generation after generation. Of course, we can change those things, but boy, is it a slow process. We share values. We share traditions to maintain that culture. We also have these unspoken norms that are just understood. You behave a certain way, and when you don't behave that way, then everybody else looks at you strangely. So I can give you an example. Those students in class that talk more than the teacher does or try to, they tell all about their life experiences. They interrupt the instructor. They do all sorts of things. Now, I can look around the room and I can see the whole class upset by it, making sighs, just wanting them to shut up. The person that is outside of that unspoken norm, the person that's doing it, has no idea that everybody around them is upset by it and that they're doing the opposite of an unspoken norm. Okay. We find also that they don't like them because they're not doing the norm of society. When I do group work, they don't want to work with that person. That's a person that's always searching for somebody to work with. They tend to exclude them because they're outside that unspoken norm. Now, cultures, like I said, do change over time, but it takes some time to get that culture to change. Now, when we look at social influence is otherwise known as conformity. So what is conformity and how does that take place? So do you obey and conform to what society deems appropriate? Now, most of the times, yes. Otherwise, you'd be in jail or you'd be hospitalized in a mental ward. There can be those that try to push the limit as much as possible, but we tend to obey society's norms. So let's take a couple of questions first. Do you pick your nose in public? Everybody picks their nose. It's like masturbating. Everybody does it. But do you do it in public? Yes or no? Do you cut in line in the grocery store? Between those two questions, which one's more normalized than the other one? Which one is more acceptable? Which situations would they be more acceptable in compared to others? So there's norms, there's unspoken norms, and then there's slight adjustments to those norms. So overall, it's conformity. Now, conformity is absolutely powerful, and there's main things that go along with it. We have automatic mimicry, social norms, and then we have normative and informational social influence. So let's take a look at those. The first one we have is automatic mimicry. Now, automatic mimicry tends to do with those mirror neurons that we have in our brain. So first we have the chameleon effect. You unintentionally mirror other people's behaviors. Now, one of the studies that you can do in your experiments in social psychology class, and there's several experiments that are done there, is the chameleon effect. You're going to test people that are with you. What if you cross your arms? What if you put your hand in your pocket? What if you play with your hair? What is it that other people in a group around you will do? Will you find others do it? Just like yawning. Will they unintentionally yawn when you yawn? Will they unintentionally cross their arms when you cross your arms? What's the percentage of people that do it? And then there's partial mirroring as well. Ever notice that when somebody has a really big yawn, you have almost like a partial yawn out of it? It's the same thing that happens with that mirroring. Do they automatically cross one arm across their shoulder or something like that and not go with the second one? Is there that partial mirroring that comes into play? Empathetic, again with those mirror neurons of empathy and moods. So you go to the store and the checkout person is in a absolutely awful mood. I always say that somebody peed in their oatmeal. So you're going through the line. You were in a perfectly happy mood. Everything was wonderful. You go through the line. By the time you're done, you're in a bad mood. You're like, oh, that person was awful. And now you're a bit cranky because that person made you cranky. It can happen the opposite way. You can have a really bad mood, go through that checkout line, and they're just peppy and caring all about you and what you're doing and interacting with you on a really positive level. And all of a sudden you walk away and your mood's better. So that empathetic mood aspect comes into play in automatic mimicry. And then we have copying, and that's our actions that include violence, that include forms of kindness, that pay it forward thing. How do you copy others' behaviors that have happened as well? Then we have conformity based off of social norms, and it tends to be, will you conform even though you know it's wrong? So what they did studies on was they do questions that they absolutely knew everybody knew the correct answer to, but they'd make their confederates, the people in on the gig, answer incorrectly. And how many people would it take before the person that they're studying will change their mind and answer incorrectly to fit in with the social norms of everybody else? So the one that's on this picture is they are looking at a picture of a square, and everybody's saying that it has 5 sides, and you can see the guy looking at it, looking for that 5th side, looking to see what it is that he doesn't see, and not understanding why people are saying it's 5 sides instead of 4. And what's the percentage rate of people that will say that it's 5 sides instead of 4, even though they know that that answer is incorrect? And they find that it's in the 60 to 65 percentile range that people will alter their mind. Now this says 1/3 of people will agree to obvious myths truths. Now that number goes up when we have the larger group. So when there's just 3 people there, what if there's 10 people there? What if there's 20 people there? What if there's 100 people there? You know, then those numbers really tend to go up into that 60 to 65 percentile. So 30 at the beginning, and then those move up higher. So another study that they did was dealing with these lines. They had a line and 3 other ones. Which line is closest to this? Now, some people can have reasons why they answered it incorrectly. But again, they'd have all the confederates answering with the most wrong answer they could find and see if that person would just conform to it or not. Now, what is it that makes you do that conformity? There's several different reasons. So one of them, you're not firmly committed. It's not one of those belief things that you're sticking by no matter what. So you're not firmly committed to that behavior, that belief system or anything along that line. How big's that group? Remember, I just talked about that. Is it a small group? You're more likely to be yourself in a smaller group than when that group gets medium-sized to large size. Now, medium-sized to large size, I always get asked, well, what is a medium-sized group? Again, that depends on you. Where is it that you feel it becomes more of a medium-sized group while you change your answers? Okay? And if it's unanimous, if everybody else is choosing that other answer, then you'll choose that other answer. If even just one person states something different, then you feel more acceptable in stating your own difference of opinion. Now, do you admire or are you attracted to anyone in that group that is answering incorrectly? So if you are, you will answer more incorrectly based off admiring. We do that with families. Do we admire or are attracted to our own family? Absolutely. And I'm not talking sexually, although it can be. Um, but if you admire people, you'll have more of their belief systems, even though in your mind you know they're wrong, because you admire them. You'll go their way. Do you feel incompetent or insecure or closely watched? You'll answer the way the group does if any of those things are taking place. And what are society's cultural norms? And do you have the respect for them? If you've been taught to respect them completely, then you will answer more along that society norms and answering correctly compared to those that have been taught to, you know, push that mark in that line drawn in the sand. Be yourself. Get out there and be unique. Don't go with the social norms. How can you tell if that person? If you're just the person that says, "Oh my goodness, just behave in class," you're the social norm person. You're the one that says culture says to respect the social norms. If you're the person that says, "All right, this person's giving me a chance to be more myself," then you can come outside those social norms a bit and have been taught that. Now, social influence is our next one. We have normative and informational. Now, normative and social influence has to be with just social approval to belong, or else you'd be rejected or disapproved of. So that can be along the lines of clothing, that can be along the lines of political choices and approval. And then we have informational. That's where you're giving evidence, logic, data, and facts, and they will actually change your mind. So the example is here we drive on one side of the road, you go to a different country, and they give you the information, the logic, and whatnot that they're driving on the opposite side. So do you make the choice to go with the logic and drive on the opposite side, or do you continue with what the norms were here? So remember logic, data, facts. Those are the things that should be able to change our minds, not based off of opinion, not based off of a background, not based off of, who we admire. Now, would you ever purposely electrocute someone knowing it would not only hurt them, but could potentially harm them, if not kill them? Yes or no? We'd all like to say the answer is no, but actually what we found is the answer is yes. So the study that was done on that was Milgram's. So what we're looking at here is the box that he actually used for electrocution. They'd have somebody called the learner who was had the electrodes put on them and all this kind of stuff. The person who was considered the teacher watched them do this, had the actual an electrocution done to them so they could see how it felt. They always said that it was a bigger electrocution or level higher than what it was. And then, and always low levels, by the way. And then what they did would ask them questions. And if they got the question right, they didn't electrocute them. If they got the question wrong, then they did. And then they go to the next question. Now, this was a study that was done where all the answers were exactly the same. It was actually played on a recording. So they weren't actually electrocuting somebody. And they had somebody, the first study was done with a gray coat, not a white coat, but we always say with a white coat now. So they had somebody in a lab coat there that was just sitting there writing down stuff, doing work. And the people doing the study would turn to them and be like, "Oh my goodness, I'm not sure if I really should do this. This is wrong. We're hurting people." And all they'd say was, "We need to continue with the study," and people would continue doing it because they felt they had to because of the situation that they were in. Now here's the voltage levels down at the bottom. We all know what XXX means, but even back then they knew in their mind what XXX means and still continued on. Here's some of the responses. They were all on a tape that were done. So they were always exactly the same to make sure that there were no changes between one teacher and another teacher and what their response may have been or the wording that came out or the responses. They got to a point that they didn't even respond anymore, like they had passed out, died, something like that. Would they continue to electrocute them? Again, found yes. So Why is it they continued? They talked to the person, hey, could you check on them? I think there's something wrong. And they'd say, we need to continue with the study. No response is considered a response and a wrong response, so keep going. And they'd keep going. So what they found with Milgram's study is that, again, 60 to 65% of the population. Now, I have a video down there on, I believe it's Milgram's study. If not, it's the one on a Milgram study done in today's age. And they found the same results. Now, they said it was over 50%. It was still the 60 to 65% range that people continued. It'll show you people quitting. It'll show you people stopping. And those are, remember, the lower percentage rates of people stopping anywhere along that line. So watch that video, please. Now we look at the compliance levels. There it is at that 65 percentile range going all the way to the end. Still remains to this day. What is that? Why is that important? Because when we think other people are telling us what to do, we will do it with blind obedience. And that's what happened in Nazi Germany. Now, how did that come to be? Milgram was Jewish. His parents were killed in the death camps in Nazi Germany. So he went to all of the court cases, or a great deal of the court cases, and what he found with people that were a party to that, they were a part of it, they kept saying, well, that's what I was told to do. It wasn't my choice. That's what I was told to do. Well, were people innately evil, or were they good and the situation caused them to behave that way? And so he walked out of one of those courtrooms and said to himself, oh, this is all BS. I'm going to go check it out. Let's do some research and find out. And he thought that less than 0.001% of the population would follow those orders, and he found instead that 60 to 65% would follow those orders. So he actually proved himself wrong and found that that situation causes people to do destructive things, to behave horribly, and he was quite shocked by that. Can we still have that in today's age? Absolutely. Here in the United States, we have children separated from their parents. We didn't even do like Nazi Germany and label them so that they could find their parents later on or know who they belong to later on. We have no clue. We house them in cages. We don't give them belongings that they need. They're packed in together. We do not treat them like humans. Yet are we allowing that to happen? Are we just saying, well, they're immigrants, they deserve that? Or are they humans? Because remember, Nazi Germans said they're Jews, they deserve that. But they're humans. Do they truly deserve that? And so, yes, we see it over and over and over again. What we find with history is that it repeats itself, and it can repeat the worst of the worst behavior. And here we are again, repeating the worst of the worst behavior. So what do we have as lessons from conformity? The evil may be in the situation, not necessarily inherent in the person. Are there people that are inherently evil? Absolutely. They are less than 2% of the population. But boy, can that 2% have an impact on the rest of us. And can we follow that impact through the fundamental attribution error? All it takes is that 2% trying to make us believe that others are bad because of who they are, their ethnicity, their color, their religion, their anything about them. We could say makes their personality and them inherently evil, and then we become inherently evil by not understanding the situation and automatically following that opinion, that wrong thought process, and then we make that fundamental attribution error. Now, when we look at different types of social influence, there's a few of them. And this is the list of 5 that we're going to go over. So the first one is social facilitation. Now, how can that make people behave differently? Well, like in a marathon, almost all the people that are there to cheer them on are there through the last few miles. Why is that? Because your body's falling apart. You just want to give up. And so social facilitation is them cheering, you can make it, you can do this, you're doing a great job. So because other people are watching us, we'll continue on. Can social facilitation work to the negative? Absolutely. So let's say you're not as confident in something that you're doing, but people are watching you do it. Do you give up easier? Do you feel because the other people are watching you that things are worse? So let's say a poster presentation. What if the whole class was watching your poster presentation instead of just me? Would you feel more nervous? Would you fumble over your words more? Would you feel differently and then make that video presentation shorter, get to the point quicker? All of those things can alter our behavior through social facilitation. Then we have social loafing. Because we believe more personality based instead of situational based, we in the United States have more social loafing problems. Social loafing problems are people that are not holding up their end of the bargain in teams. Okay? So when we will look at social loafing, we can look at them as just a person that's lazy, incompetent, won't do anything. They're going to make you do it. But has a situation in the past caused them to be a social loafer? Is it a situation right now? Is it a situation where their brain doesn't function well because they have so many crises going on constantly that they just can't handle life, let alone to try and think and help anyone else? They're not getting through their own life. Is it that in the past they've been in groups and you know that person that says I'm the smartest one in the group, just let me do it because I don't want you to screw it up? Has that happened to them to the point where they've decided, well, somebody else isn't going to let me do anything anyway? In the situation, is it one of those things where you've been assigned jobs in that team, but the assignment doesn't go with what you're capable of doing? So maybe you're the person who's supposed to speak in front of everybody else, but you pee your pants when you speak in front of other people, or you pass out in front of other people. Can that make you to back right out of that group to make sure that you're not going to do it in the end? Absolutely. So many times we have to look at the situation, remember. That's what this whole thing is about, to understand the behavior. Next one we have is de-individualization or de-individuation. Now, what is this? This is when you're anonymous in some way, shape, or form so that other people can't tell who you are. And when that happens, we behave more with our id and more badly. So why is it the KKK wore hoods over their face so no one could tell who they are? So they could get away with behaving badly and no one knowing which one they were or who they were. The same thing with why do your parents want your curfew at night after dark? Because the dark makes us behave and make decisions that are more negative and do things that are more negative. We have a big problem with it currently online. Because you're anonymous, you will say things that are more negative, do things that are more negative, and be bullying. More bullying aspects take place because there's ways for other people not to know who you are. So that's de-individuation. Group polarization. When it comes to group polarization, it can go positive or negative, just like anything else. So most often what we tend to see a problem with it is to do with prejudice and going negative. So let's do the positive first. And we'll say, let's say a whole bunch of you were getting together and you decided you're going to go on a vacation. Okay? So you're doing this all through a group text message, and one of the people in the text message says, hey, let's go to the Caribbean. It's beautiful there. Somebody else pops in and said, yeah, I heard the water is crystal clear, as blue as can be. It's wonderful. Another person pops in and says, yeah, I heard the sand is white and it's such fine sand that it's fabulous. And each one pops in with something else that is wonderful until all of a sudden everybody in the group goes, yep, let's do it. We're going to the Caribbean. Okay, that's group polarization, where everybody has a little tidbit to put in to convince everybody to go a certain way. Group polarization, like I said, is most often aligned with negative or prejudices. So let's say you get together for Thanksgiving, you get together for Christmas, something like that. You're getting together with all your family, they're all at the dinner table, and one person says a prejudicial thing, and somebody else pipes in, says something else prejudicial, and then somebody else. And you'll notice as the conversation goes, it can get very quickly very prejudicial, very negative. Okay? You may know differently, you may believe differently, you may have logic and facts and data that are different, but because everybody goes that way, do you just nod your head just to get them to shut up? Just to not be the person that they're going to target in that conversation? Because if you do, that nodding of the head can actually make your body start to believe their way. So if you're shaking your head no, then you can stay with your own beliefs. If you're nodding, then it'll polarize you towards that belief system. Okay? So that happens all the time. Next one we have is groupthink. Where does groupthink come into play? That actually has to do with our jury system and our judicial system. Now, what they had in plan for our juries is not actually what took place. So what they had in plan for juries was there'd be 12 independent people there with independent thought processes that would hear all that information differently, go into a group, and argue that information out. And what we find instead is groupthink takes place. So yes, there are 12 individuals. Yes, they heard 12 things with their own interpretations of those things. But then when they get in the group, the most vibrant personality, the one that seems to be the most decisive in the group, can really push that group to think one way. Now, why is it? It's not convincing them through data and facts. It's convincing them that peripheral vision. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to be here for 3 days trying to deliberate on this. Let's just take a vote, figure out where we're at, and see if we're even close already. Maybe we're always all on the same page with this. It is, what are we going to have for lunch? I'm more concerned about what we're having lunch and when we're having lunch than I am about the life, death, future of this individual that we're deciding on. Groupthink prevents individuals from realistically assessing the options and just going with a group decision instead of having that complete exchange of ideas. I've been in many juries, on many juries, and I've watched this happen constantly. Now, what is social influence when it goes towards the positive? And can individuals be powerful when we know situations impact individuals so much? And the answer is, of course, absolutely yes. We resist obeying and conforming to social norms that harm others, that are negative towards others, that are politically negative or do not help others. Start your own social movements to help. Try to speak up every time there's a groupthink situation going on and go against it, or at least make sure that you're not following it. That kind of stuff is the power of individuals. Now, when we don't, we go into what's called antisocial relations. There, of course, prejudice is what comes from antisocial relations. And then the behaviors, the aggressive tendencies, the voting that is aggressively negative, all of those things come from the prejudices. So we're going to look at each one of those things. So first you have to understand where your prejudices come from. They come from the very bottom thing, and that's the stereotype. So you have a stereotype, a certain belief that is applied to a whole group of individuals. Based off of that certain generalized belief, you'll get an unjustified attitude about that group. That unjustified attitude leads to discriminatory behavior or unjustified behavior to a certain population. Can our prejudices change? Absolutely. This is one about interracial dating. Now, back when it was called the Greatest Generation, being born prior to 1928. Their belief system is absolutely not. I don't understand why that would even happen. It is a negative thing. You should never interracially date. Why? Stereotypes. There were stereotypes that even to this day I've heard people say that led them to believe that one population was related to animals more than another population and the negativity that it was associated with it. They didn't let facts and data interfere with that opinion. Then we go up to the generation of now. Of course, this has changed slowly over time. Generation now, pretty much everybody's like, I don't care, that's normal. How did it get normal? How did we go from absolutely not to normal? Education is a huge part of it. Facts, data, central route of persuasion, not peripheral route. People are changing their belief systems compared to what their families believe based off of that facts and data that go along with it. So can things be changed? Absolutely. Are there prejudices that still remain? Absolutely. Just look at women. Women were making huge strides, and then all of a sudden we went back to the Stone Age and the unfair treatment that goes along with it. Is there a glass ceiling for women? Absolutely. How does that happen? There are situations that cause it, and so are they judged differently? What if you have a woman boss compared to a man boss? If you're a woman and you become a woman boss, you'll see it. There'll be very different things. So, Muslims after 9/11, there's gay marriage that still has problems. These are subtle, institutionally based prejudices. Institutionally based are the way we vote, the way it's done. Past presidents over the way it's been throughout their life, handed down through religious aspects, handed down through families. There's all sorts of things that cause subtle institutional prejudices that continue on. And what we were looking for is people that say that I'm not prejudiced tend to be the ones that are prejudiced. Why? We all have prejudices. Everybody does. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what ethnicity. None of those. Everybody has prejudices. Everybody. So understanding that you do, trying to counteract those, working towards what it is that you're saying and doing and believing that is prejudicial, and then working to undo that prejudice by understanding the situations that caused the thought process that got you where you're at. Social inequalities are the roots of prejudice. Now, it goes both ways. Those that are well off have disrespect and contempt for those that are less well off. They believe that they are just not worthy. I worked for it, you're not working for it. I'm better than you are. It works the opposite way. Those that don't have, those that are suffering, it has a complete disrespect for and contempt for those that have, because they believe that those people are evil and they are not worthy. They were not worthy because they don't help out others that are in need. Anybody that makes it someplace had people that helped them. We like to believe that we didn't, but you do. Where were they? What were they? What did they say? How did they get you there? But what we tend to have is, I got here by myself, so that means you can get there by yourself. So contempt and disrespect is bred on both sides. It all comes from and stems from, too, the us versus them, in group versus out group. My group is right, so I favor my group's opinions more than yours. You're either with me or you're against me, is the us versus them. When we assign people those groups, we automatically assign the stereotypes, which leads to the prejudice, which leads to the discrimination. So this is an example of an us versus them context. Okay, emotional roots of prejudice. Where do they come from? We have the scapegoat theory first. The scapegoat theory says that whenever something bad happens to me, I'm angry about it, I'm upset about it, and I need to find somebody to blame. So I don't get paid enough. So right now we have this thing about, oh, why should what we call them now essential workers? Why should the gas station person? Why should the worker that stocks the shelves? Why should they get paid any better? I get paid like shit. Well, the recognition that you get paid poorly is because the people that want to make the money and truly make all the money aren't willing to share with you. So you will then forward it on and say, I'm not willing to share with anybody else. That's the scapegoat theory. You will also find that it will tell you, your ads will tell you, your commercials will tell you, people will tell you to blame these people that are on a lower pay scale than you because they're already a lesser group than you. They're already not as good as you, so they're the reason, the problem. Now, when somebody's above you, we'd like to say we don't automatically think that they're better than us, but that is actually what goes along with it. You can't believe in good unless you believe in evil. You can't believe in good or altruistic unless you believe in evil, that kind of thing. So we tend to think that we'll work our way up to that. We'll get there sometime. We have that hope, and hope tries to keep us more positive. We don't blame them because we want to be like them. So we have to blame the people we don't want to be like, so we blame those that are lesser than ourselves, or what we deem lesser than ourselves. Now, there are cognitive roots to our prejudice, so we're going to look at each and every one of these as well. The first one is the other race effect. We are very sensitive to seeing mixed races or different races. I always love people that say, I don't see color. Are you colorblind? Of course you see color. Everybody sees color. Even people of color see color and all variations of that color. So of course we see color. It is not that we don't see it. It is actually that we're hypersensitive to the differences in color. I mean, just talk about tans for white people. I get picked on all the time because of how white I am and that my tan isn't even a tan. I glow in the dark. That's a hypersensitivity to color within color. So, yeah, of course you see color. That doesn't tell us that things are different. So let's take a look at one. So I want you to look at these faces right here. Now, I want you to choose one, which is 80%, it's mixed race, 80% Chinese to 20% Caucasian. So choose the person that you believe is 80-20. Put your finger on it, take note of it mentally, whatever. 80% Chinese to 20% Caucasian. Then I want you to choose the one that you think is 60% Chinese to 40% Caucasian, otherwise known as white, by the way. 60-40. Choose that one, put your finger on it. 80-20, 60-40. Now here's the reality of it. That's the typical choice. True choice. Now where were you? Were you in the typical mixed race hypersensitivity that we all are? Or were you right on? The other race effect is that we tend to think that there's uniformity in the appearance of groups. And so we make assumptions. Now remember the whole thing that goes with assumptions. So we have these stereotypes that go along with it. Next one we have is vivid case scenario. Vivid case scenario, why do we have issues with the Muslim religion right now? Because of 9/11. Now if we look at the Muslim religion or the religion of Islam and how large it is, terrorism and how large a group that is, and actually terrorists that are of the Islamic or Muslim religion, you'll find that percentage-wise, they're not an issue. Yet we have that vivid case of 9/11 that comes to our mind so automatically knocks out all facts and data that go along with it and go, nope, nope, that's the way it is. When we actually look at the highest terrorist groups, I want you to think of what ethnicity is the largest statistical grouping of terrorists. They're white. what religion is the largest group of terrorists, you're going to find that it is of the Christian religion, and Catholic in particular tends to be the one that's highest on the terrorist group. So what is it that makes that vivid case scenario overrule statistics, overrule actual logical and evidence-based thinking? First of all, it's that available heuristics that we've talked about before. And then the other thing is confirmation bias, looking for things that will confirm what we already believe and go, no, no, this is the way it is, blah, 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 blah. But not looking for the counterexamples, not looking for the proof that goes against what we believe. Now remember, on your computers, when you're looking this up, you can go so much so one way that that computer has already built a bubble for you that will have a hard time undoing that bubble. So you may need to even borrow somebody else's computer that believes an opposing way to be able to find it. Have you ever blamed the victim? We all do, by the way. It's called the just world fallacy. We also call it karma, just world fallacy. We believe things happen for a reason. People get punished because they deserve to be punished. People get good things that happen because they were good people. But do you know of somebody that's a good person that has cancer? Do they truly deserve that? Do you know of bad people that have done really bad things and it seems like everything bounces off of them? They never tend to have anything happen to them. Both of those things happen. They happen more often than not. There is a just world fallacy. So we believe that certain people earn being rich and privileged, and the other people don't. And that's what goes with that karma and just world fallacy. So thinking habits that reinforce prejudice, there's 4 of them. Available heuristics, we already talked about. Confirmation bias, we already talked about. Hindsight bias is they should have known better. We love to do this with people. Well, I would have done this. Or, if I were in that situation, why didn't they do this? Any of those questions are where you're automatically blaming the victim. So if you hear them come out of your mouth, reassess, fix that. Know that you're going with an automatic prejudicial thought process. And that's based off of that just world fallacy. Cognitive dissonance, we've gone into quite extensively because I know there's test questions on it and people really have a hard time understanding it. But if my culture and family treats minorities that way, then of course they can't be wrong. So that plays into that cognitive dissonance. So even though I might know differently, I'll behave the same way. I'll vote the same way. I'll vote to keep it the same. So one of the biggest ones that are out there to discuss how we blame the victim is, of course, date rape. She should have known better. What was she doing in that skirt? Why did she go home with him? Why were they alone? I mean, have you ever been on a date alone? You really can't get to know people until you do. So they will say, well, they'd known each other for a long time, or they didn't know each other long enough, or because she should have known if they knew each other for too long, and she shouldn't have gone there if they didn't know each other very long at all. So there's a lot of this just world fallacy, blaming the victim, that comes into play. So have you ever thought any of these things? If you have, then that's that blaming the victim. So go through these, read them, and see, have you even come close to any of these? If you have, rethink, start using some facts, some data, get out of that prejudicial thought process. All right, aggression comes from, of course, more that prejudicial behavior. So it is with the intent of harming somebody else. So there's different forms of aggression. We've gone over this a little bit in the sex chapter. Physical, more man-based. Verbal, both people, both genders. Relational, more female-based. So we have aggression. We all have aggressive tendencies. And this is what comes out of our stereotypes that move into prejudice, that go into aggression. Where do they go to? Now, aggression can be planned or it can be reactive. You know, you always hear on Law and Order that they just did it in the spur of the moment. You know, that person made me so angry, I just killed him. That's reactive. Planned is cold, calculating, going for it. So they plan out how to destroy you. Relational tends to go more often with planned. Physical tends to go more often with reactive. So there's that cold and calculating means to an end. Now, what's the biology of aggression? Why do we have to discuss there? Because we've had many people in the criminal justice system actually say, you know, I couldn't help myself because my brain says that I'm an aggressive person. And yes, there is an area of your brain that can show us it's either underdeveloped or overdeveloped, and that you're overstimulated or understimulated tends to deal with the amygdala and your emotions that go along with it. But what we've also found with those studies is that based off of what's been taught to those people, they don't actually have to be aggressive. And for instance, the first person that was doing studies on this actually had a brain that showed he was an aggressive person or could potentially be aggressive and wasn't. It's not in an area that says this is the way it has to be. There's also genetics in and nurture based in aggression. Have you been taught to be aggressive? Have you seen aggression? Have you seen verbal outbursts on a regular basis? Therefore, you'll become Karen. The term that goes along with it is a Karen. Have you seen that regularly? Are you genetically coming from a Karen? Same thing with aggressive tendencies with men. Okay. Hormones, the more testosterone, the more aggressive we do tend to be. Psychosocial factors that come into play. Here's some of them. So we have aversive conditions. A lot of that, you know, awful smells, body odors, anything like that create negative behaviors. Being overly hot creates negative behaviors. Have you been reinforced for being aggressive? Has it been modeled for you? Are you adopting social scripts from your culture for or against aggression? Then we have that first one, that unpleasant conditions. Violence increases on extremely hot days. Violence increases when you're in pain, when you're in a very large crowded place, when there's negative odors around you. That's called the frustration aggression principle. When you get frustrated about an event, you get more aggressive because of it, and then you act out because of those possible frustrations. That can also be you're not making enough money at home to do what you want to do with your life or even fill the basic needs. So you have to take that frustration out on others. Who can you blame? You're not going for the people above, you're going for the people that are lesser than you. Those social scripts that are out there are constructed culturally. So we have this program that's just sort of set up in our mind that we just download regularly that says that this is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way it is. So we can see that the more you've been prone to that social script of aggressive behaviors will increase aggressive behaviors. Media and its aggression, we've gone over this as well. How can we counteract that aggression? We need to talk it out. We need to counteract it with those lemming games that can say, you know, now you got to try and save them. You watch violent television shows, then you got to watch those, not necessarily chick flicks, but something on a more positive, happy note. You can counteract it. You can teach counteracting it. Education can counteract it. So make sure that although you know there's aggression out of there, it can be something that becomes that cultural norm that you can contradict it if you so choose. Again, when we look at aggression, we have to look at biologically and the things that set up for that. Psychologically and socioculturally, you can read each one of these and all the things that can set into it. Of course, there's more than that, just what's in each one of those sections, but they give you an example of each one of them that can lead to that aggressive behavior. Now, when we go to pro-social behavior, and what is it that brings about pro-social behavior? First of all, we have to understand attraction and what makes us attracted to others. That understanding of attraction, when we are attracted to others, we socially script with those. We believe them, we admire them, we follow them more. So we have to understand that attraction to understand why we behave the way we do. So, of course, psychologically, some of those main factors: proximity, exposure, familiarity, and attractiveness. Romantic love is a big one in understanding attraction overall, is understanding romantic love as well. So proximity and exposure are a big deal. The more you're around people, the more you believe like those people. The more you're exposed to them, the more you're exposed to their beliefs. So the more proximity you are, the more you like them, the more you're attracted to them, which brought about what was called the mere exposure effect. They actually did studies and found that the more you're around people, the more you like them. The more you see them, the more you like them. And the more that you hear their name, the more understanding you are of them, the more you like them. So they found out about this mere exposure effect, and politically, of course, they used it. So let's take a look at that. Now, of course, you know this is George Bush. Now, what they found with the mere exposure effect is because we look at people and they go into the in-group versus out-group, us versus them, we want people to be more like us, and we automatically believe that people that are more like us think more like us and are looking out for us because we are looking out for us. So in the study, George Bush was running for president. And during that time period, he found out about this. His people found out about this, and they said, "All right." At the time, they would not allow any news or any commercials, even microseconds longer than the opposing opponent, because they understood the mere exposure effect. So you couldn't have more. They had to be the exact same amount of time. They had to be dead equivalent. So how could they make one person's commercials and ads more effective than the other person's? The mere exposure effect. So because if you can see yourself in them, you will think they were looking out for you. That's exactly what they did. This voter that they have there, Joe Smo average, it isn't actually a person, although he does look like that guy from Friends to me. But what they did was type in Joe Smo average voter at the time. Joe Smo average voter at the time was early to middle-aged individual, not older age, early to middle-aged individual, and this was the group that they were looking for too. White, middle class job, that kind of thing. And so they pop all this information into a computer. Out pops Joe Smo voter there. Now what they did is to make people believe that this individual was out for their benefit and to help them and to work on that mere exposure effect was they took George Bush's real picture, they took voter's picture, they mixed those two together on a 60-40 blend, and they got the other picture. So does it still look like George Bush? Absolutely. Do you even recognize most of the time that there's a difference there? No. That's the point. So when they did that, well, you can see the outcome. Did he win? Absolutely. Brilliant thought process, brilliant commercial tactics and advertising tactics. This was just up there in the top rated of what to do and how to go about it. It was pretty spectacular, actually. Now, physical attractiveness is next. Remember that halo effect that you have, and that you believe that those that are physically attractive are happier, more emotionally stable, they're good people compared to bad people. And we found that physical attractiveness does not actually relate to these things, even though that's what we tend to believe about them. Similarities and attraction. Now, you're always told opposites attract, and we do, but we have to find that equilibrium or homeostasis. That means we have to find things that we are similar on, or that relationship will never work out. Whether it's humor, education, whatever. What is it that we're similar on? Do we like to do the same things? All of those things can come into play. So we have to find similarities. The more similar you are to the opposite person, the more that relationship will last longer. Okay? So we had to look at that similarity based on that attraction to understand why these prejudices come up and how can we contradict them. So we find that the more you are romantically in love with the person, they go through these stages. And at the end, it gets to positive interaction. It gets to supporting each other. So what can we look at romantic love to get us to positively interact and support those that are not similar to us or what we deem as not similar? So it's the equity, it's the self-disclosure, and it's those positive interactions that not only produce that long-lasting relationship, it produces long-lasting relationships that those that we actually do have differences on. You got to find that homeostasis, you got to find that equilibrium, you got to find those similarities in understanding in order for you to have empathy for that person, in order for you to have empathy for that group, in order for you to understand their situation and not think dispositionally. Is your brain pleased by the sight of good-looking people? We already know it's yes. And here's the areas that light up on your brain as soon as you see somebody that is what you deem as attractive, whether it's the same sex or the opposing sex. Altruism is when you have unselfish regard for the welfare of other people. Now, I have this gentleman on here because he jumped into a subway just before that subway train was coming to save somebody who had fallen in. He, in fact, couldn't get out. He had to lay down in between the railings, got that person out, but didn't get himself out. Everyone thought he was going to die. He luckily lived. But he did that, saving that other person with the knowledge that he could die himself. Other people don't tend to do this. This is also a rare population. Part of what comes into play with altruism or even just helping of others is what's called bystander intervention and situations that cause bystander intervention issues. So did you even notice the situation or not? What is your appraisal of that situation? Do you deem it as an emergency or not? And do you assume responsibility or not? And the big one is, do you assume responsibility? When we look at do you assume responsibility, we come into play with the bystander effect. Now, the bystander effect says that the more people around you, the more you will automatically diffuse the responsibility out to other people. And they all do the same thing. So you could be in a group of 10 people, see one person that needs help. You'll look around at the group and see if somebody else is going to help. You will actually be more likely to help if somebody else helps. But the problem is you look around the group, and if the group isn't helping, you will automatically think, well, that person doesn't need help. That person must be the cause of their own problems. That must be an unsafe situation. So if no one else is helping, they must know it's dangerous. They must know that person's faking. They must know something, and therefore I shouldn't help either. Know and understand that every single person in that group is thinking the same exact thing because that's what our mind actually does. So now that you know it, it is your responsibility to help. You must help because you know that everybody else has this diffusion of responsibility through the bystander effect, and you must counteract it. Now, when are bystanders most likely to help? If they deem them deserving, if they're in a good mood, and it's still that gender bias if it's a woman. If they're in a rural area, a small town area, compared to being in the city, compared to being a man, and compared to be if you're in a bad mood or in a hurry. Now, our norms of processing, influencing, helping. Now, when we look at these, we have utilitarianism. That's when you do it for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Social exchange means that you'd feel guilty if you didn't do it. Reciprocity is, what do I get out of the deal? I'll do this for you if you do this for me. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And then social responsibility. It's just the right thing to do. Now, many times all of these play into the way we react to things. And if we're going to change our society into a more positive society of helping others that are in need of help.